All right, it's 2 minutes past the hour, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I know there's still some people joining us as I see the waiting room is being populated yet with some folks, but welcome everyone. This is the December edition of the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook. This is our regular monthly meeting that we have along with our partners from AASC, USDA, Drought Mitigation Center, and the NOAA and NOAA Regional Climate Centers. Our speaker today is Bridgette Mason, who's the Assistant State Climatologist up in Wisconsin. And Bridgette's going to be presenting the information for the region here today. A couple housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted and off camera until we're done. The second thing is if you have any questions at all during this process, you can use the Q&A down below. So if you go down to the bottom of the Zoom room window, you'll see Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A versus the chat. We'll get to those there. If there's questions we don't get to during the presentation, we'll go ahead and organize those and present those to Bridgette at the very end. So you can hold your questions till the very end, or you can put them in the Q&A, and we'll try and answer them as we go through. But with that, I'd like to welcome Bridgette Mason for our presentation today. Oh, and one last thing, we will be recording this meeting, and it will be posted afterwards. So just so everyone is aware, we will be recording. Bridgette, you can take it away.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry my video is off, but it is so windy, as you all probably know, and it's just making things a little bit more glitchy. So I'm just going to keep my video off just to save some bandwidth. So I hope you understand, but thank you so much for joining. Like Brian said, we're just going to cover what the North Central region has seen over the last month or so, and a little bit beyond the last month, just taking a look at the last few months. Like Brian said, you can see past webinars on the two links on this screen. And just a reminder, if you haven't joined us before, this webinar has been going on for many years and is a collaboration between many entities. And so we just appreciate all of the work that goes into creating these. And if you're interested in joining us again next month, please do so January 15th with Dr. Zach Hoyleman out of the Montana Climate Office. So, to give you an outline of what we'll be looking at today, we'll start with recent conditions, talk about some impacts, winter weather, and then the outlook. And like Brian said, we will answer questions at the end, and maybe Brian might do a little bit of answering in the chat while things are going on. But if not, we can always talk about things at the end. And so to start out, let's look at those recent conditions. And we're going to start out by looking at autumn, since climatological autumn just ended, and then work our way toward more recent conditions. And so the map on the left is a ranking of average temperature between September and November 2025, where the pinks, oranges, and reds represent warmer than average temperatures. What the map on the left shows is that autumn was warm for our region, especially the further west you go. We see that Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota had their second warmest falls on record, and a handful of states even saw their fourth warmest falls on record. And keep in mind that when I say record here, it's based on 131 years of data, so these are pretty impressive feats. And now looking at precipitation on the right, the yellows, golds, and browns depict that autumn was drier than average, and the greens depict that things were a little bit wetter than average. And we see a bit of a mix for fall. We see that fall was drier than normal for most of the Midwest, especially Wisconsin and Illinois, which saw their seventh and driest falls. Ohio, Nebraska, Colorado, and Montana saw a near normal precipitation for fall, and then Kentucky, Kansas, the Dakotas, and Wyoming saw above normal fall precipitation. So overall, fall was not record breaking, but we had some near records. And then just looking at November, we see near normal temperatures. to the east, and then warmer than normal temperatures the further west you go, with Wyoming and Colorado clocking in at their third warmest Novembers on record. Precipitation was near normal for most. Only South Dakota is depicted as slightly wetter than normal. Otherwise, the central part of the Midwest, along with Wyoming and Colorado, ended November slightly drier than normal. Again, though, nothing record breaking, but some near normal, near records regarding temperature. Now we're looking at the last 30 days, starting with temperature. And on the left, we can see a pretty clear pattern of where temperatures were generally sub-freezing to the north and east in higher elevations, which spoiler alert, this sub-freezing area aligns fairly well with the snowpack that we've had, helping keep things cool. And then for more of the southern tier of the region, the yellows and the oranges show that those areas averaged generally above freezing for the most part. And then on the right, it's clear that the eastern half of the region was much cooler than normal with those greens and blues, and the western half of the region was much warmer than normal with the yellows, oranges, and reds. Um, and I just want you to keep this pattern in mind, this west to east pattern in mind, as it will become very clear when we go throughout the discussion as how this affected winter weather and the type of precipitation that has fallen lately. But if you haven't already noticed, things have changed the last couple of days. Temperatures have really warmed up, so much so that the western third of the region has seen 50s, 60s, and even 70s in some spots. And even the Midwest has seen temps above freezing, which really has not been the case the last few weeks. So, quite a big change. I won't go into much more detail about this warm up, except for the fact that it has been causing some pretty serious snow melts, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And, just depending on who you are and your livelihood and hobbies, you may or may not be happy about the snow melts. Now, coming back to the last 30 days, looking at precipitation, most of the region has seen about under 2 inches of precipitation, with large pockets of less than an inch across the west. However, there are a few pockets of 3 or more inches in the Ohio River Valley, Missouri, Upper Michigan, and the far west. And so, what do these totals mean for this time of year? Well, many in the Midwest, Nebraska, Wyoming have seen less than 75% of their normal amount of precipitation for this time of year, and even pockets of Nebraska and Wyoming have seen less than 25% of normal. On the flip side, what your eyes might be drawn to are the blues and the purples in parts of Michigan, Kansas, Colorado, the Dakotas, Montana, where they have all seen well over 200% of their normal precipitation for this time of year. And we'll talk about what's been going on specifically in Montana and the snowfall we've been seeing. But before moving on, I just want you to keep in mind that winter is when we tend to dry out, and the normal amount of precipitation we see in the winter is lower than what we would see in the summer. So when we say 50% of normal, that could really mean just a half an inch below normal. Or when we say 400% of normal, that could really just mean an inch or two above normal. So just keep in mind that precipitation amounts are lower this time of year, so percentages may not be what they seem if you're also considering spring and summer. Now, you're probably looking for more information on the abundance of snowfall many of us have seen, or the incredible precipitation that Montana has seen. And yes, of course, I will discuss that. But first, I want to quickly discuss what these recent conditions mean for things like drought and hydrology. So, we're going to see what kind of impacts these conditions have had on us. And so, while some of us might not think about drought in the winter, others of us keep it very close in mind, as there are still lots of implications this time of year and what drought means later on in the spring. And so this map on the left is where we are currently at, with about 59% of the region considered to be in drought. Unfortunately, drought is still lingering for the eastern Midwest and for the West, and has even expanded slightly over the last 4 weeks, which you can see on that bottom left map. Those yellows depict an increase or a degradation in drought. Fortunately, though, like I mentioned, the rain in Montana has helped. Unfortunately, though, the snow that much of the region has seen lately has not really helped due to its low liquid equivalence and the limited opportunity to melt and infiltrate into the soils. However, we will take what we can get when it comes to drought relief, so we're still going to be thankful for even that snow melt that we've seen. And of course, another reminder that winter is typically our driest time of the year, so it can be a little difficult to see drought improvement, but we do hope for that soil moisture recharge and recovery throughout the winter. Now, looking at some of the indicators we consider when thinking about impacts, we have soil moisture, and there has not really been much of a change in soil moisture since the end of November. But if we look at the change since mid-fall, so that map on the left, we do see that things have gotten slightly drier across much of the Midwest and slightly wetter across the northern plains, particularly western Montana. This pattern of drier and wetter aligns fairly well with the precipitation pattern that we've seen over the last month to 3 months. On the right, we're looking at ranking of soil moisture in terms of precipitation, where much of the Midwest, as well as parts of the West, are drier, which again aligns with what we're seeing in our precipitation pattern since things have been dry. On the flip side, though, there are patches in Kentucky, Kansas, the Dakotas, and Montana that are slightly wetter, which does align with the abundance or slight abundance of precipitation that those areas have seen. Now we can look at stream flow, and what we see is that much of the Midwest is below normal, which again makes sense with the lack of liquid equivalent precipitation. Even many of the stream gauges that are labeled normal or shaded in that green color that you see are really less than the 50th percentile, which means drier. However, some of these gauges are above normal in Minnesota, Nebraska, and Kansas, and some are even much above normal, such as in western Montana, again, thanks to the abundance of precipitation. So a little bit of mixture, but everything is aligning with what we've seen in our precipitation patterns lately. And lastly, you might be thinking, why are there no gauges in the northern plains? But that's just because those gauges are frozen. So that's why there's a little bit of a blank space up there. Now, when talking about soil moisture, I can't help but think about what it means for agriculture. So, just thought I'd talk about agriculture real quick here. Right now, the dry soils are not an immediate concern for agriculture, but they could be concerning come spring when producers may have to consider limited tillage or earlier cover crop termination to conserve surface soil moisture. However, as many of you have experienced the last couple of days, the snow is melting. Some of us are getting rain. And so when that snowpack melts and we get that rain, it is great news for soil moisture replenishment, especially since most of the ground is not frozen and that water can infiltrate. However, snowmelt is not such great news for livestock health, as thawed, wet soils can lead to muddy conditions, which can then cause livestock stress and illness, and also means the possibility of livestock or even workers getting stuck in the mud. However, one more thing is that if the snow melts, refreezes, so we get a layer of ice on the ground, that can cause damage to perennial crops like alfalfa by cutting off oxygen supply to the crop. So lots of things going on and lots of things to consider when we have snow melt events. Additionally, thinking about how the cold relates to crops, if you aren't familiar with the map on the left, this is a map of plant hardiness zones, which are guides for growing perennial plants. And these zones are based on the average lowest temperature a location sees in the winter. And it turns out that some of these colder temperatures that some of us saw over the last few weeks were near the average lowest temperature that's depicted in our plant hardiness zones, such as in southern Indiana. So this is just a good reminder to check out your plant hardiness zone for the suitability of perennials in your area. Now, thinking about how some of these cooler temperatures may impact soil frost depth, currently frost depth varies from little to no frost around the south and west to a few inches of frost around the Great Plains and the upper Midwest. And you might be thinking, well, it's been so cold, wouldn't the frost dig deeper? And usually I'd say yes, you're right. Cold can mean deeper frost. However, snow cover is an excellent insulator. So many of the soils that are or were snow covered are still unfrozen or only have a few inches of frost. Now, there are benefits to frozen grounds, and one such benefit is for roadway transportation. So, the grounds under the roads in northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, and likely other northern areas have been declared frozen, which is pretty good for the logging industry to be able to take trucks and heavy equipment out onto logging roads, as well as for transporting heavier loads of goods such as logs, salt, and sand. Now, turning back to the hydrology side of things, how are some of our major rivers holding up? Fortunately, there are no major issues right now on our rivers. On the Mississippi, they are monitoring around the St. Louis as levels are low. Those low levels aren't necessarily abnormal, as that stretch between Missouri and Illinois typically sees its lowest stages this time of year. However, they are monitoring the low levels, especially if it gets super cold, which can cause ice bites. And ice bites happen when the river upstream freezes quickly due to a quick drop in temperatures, and then the river flows drop quickly as a result. This can threaten navigation, particularly when the river level is already so low. And so, one way to try to be proactive and keep the river navigable is by dredging the Mississippi south of the St. Louis. But at the time, we are not currently facing any major transportation or commercial navigation issues on the Mississippi, so that is great news. And another spoiler alert, I don't think we're going to have a super cold blast of air that will threaten the river for ice bites. So that's also somewhat good news. Now, on the Missouri River, they made the winter release of water from the Gavins Point Dam in southeast South Dakota in early December, meaning that they just lowered how much water comes out of the dam. On the main stem of the Missouri, flows are low for this time of year, about 10 to 24% of normal. And in Herman, the Missouri River is about a foot and a half above the threshold at which low water impacts begin, meaning that water intake issues could emerge and cooling issues for some power plants. But the good news is looking at or not the good news, but just looking at the forecast, Herman should not reach the low water impact stage until early January. So the good news is that there should be some time to see improvement, and hopefully get those water levels a little up. But if those water levels do not increase, a little bit more water would likely be released from further upstream. Now, finally, looking at the Ohio River, flows are slightly below normal as of recent. However, the forecast suggests that flow could change to normal by the end of the year and then above normal flow in January, which would certainly help the lower Mississippi and its low flowed stage. Now, switching gears slightly to lakes, specifically Great Lakes ice cover. As of yesterday, the Great Lakes had about 3.7% of ice cover, which is down from 5.6% on Monday, thanks to the warm up. Where the ice is forming is more so along the shores in the shallow regions of Saginaw Bay, Green Bay, Western Lake Erie, and Lake St. Clair. And while I know 3.7% of ice cover sounds pretty small, it's actually on track with the historical average. As we can see on the right map, the historical average is the red curve, and the current conditions are the small dark line, where we see the peak of about 5.6% from Monday, and then the dip to the current 3.7%. As of yesterday. And like I said, it has dipped, but we're still on track with normal. Now, in addition to the Great Lakes, local lakes are also freezing over. In the Madison, Wisconsin area, Lakes Wingra and Monona have been declared iced over as of earlier this month, which is right around normal. We are still waiting on Lake Mendota to freeze over, which we were getting pretty close earlier this month, but with the recent warm up, we are still waiting. Um, Many local lakes have also frozen over in South Dakota and Minnesota. Unfortunately, though, a lot of the lake ice is turning to slush with the warm up, so please use this as a reminder to take caution if you decide to venture out onto the ice. And so now that we've started talking about some of the cold season indicators, such as lake ice, let's dive a little deeper into the winter weather and some of what we've experienced thus far in the season. So some of you may be thinking, oh my goodness, this is the most extreme weather, the most extreme winter weather I've seen in years, such as maybe the Chicago Bears. Or others of you might be thinking, what winter? It's not winter here, such as out in Denver. And you might be wondering, how can I justify what I'm experiencing with the data that we have? Well, the Accumulated Winter Season Severity Index, or AUSSI, was developed to help quantify the severity of winter, where it considers maximum and minimum temperatures, snowfall, and snow depth. And so, where does this winter stand so far? Well, while it's still early in the season, we see a very drastic difference from west to east with a gradient of mild to extreme. Much of the western half of the North Central region is experiencing a mild winter, even record mild in parts of Wyoming and Montana. But the further east you go, the more severe conditions are. Much of the eastern side of the region is experiencing a severe to extreme winter. And as I've already alluded to, and as you can guess, the cold and the snow is the culprit. So let's take a look at these winter-like conditions. So, starting with the extreme cold in the Midwest. As you can see by these two maps, hundreds of stations set or tied record cold, low, and high temperatures, while some of these stations have not done in many years. Clearly, there are many temperature records I could go through, hundreds I could go through, but I will spare you the time and just shout out one example. This past Sunday, Indianapolis tied the record low temperature of -4 degrees, which was previously set in 1901. And Indianapolis also broke the old record of a cold high temperature of 9 degrees with a new high of 7 degrees. And so many locations have been saying this is my coldest start to the winter. And so let's see how that compares to other winters. And just to name a few, it's been the coldest start to winter for Chicagoland since 2019, 2013, for many stations in Ohio since 2010, and for Madison and Milwaukee since 1976. Madison saw a -3 degree reading on December 4th, which makes Madison's earliest sub-zero temperature since 1985. Also in Wisconsin, far northern Wisconsin, Ashland spent 19 days below freezing from late November to early December. And the only other time that this time frame was sub-freezing for at least 19 days was in 2007. So even in the Northwoods, this cold is pretty unusual. In fact, this type of extreme cold usually doesn't hit until January in the Midwest. So the Midwest is really off to a strong, unusual start this winter. And whether you like it or not, the abundance of cold air really helped produce snow and keep it around, at least for us in the east. It's been an incredible start to the winter season snowfall for the eastern part of the region, with 12 inches or more for much of the upper Midwest, and even 2 feet or more for lake effect areas and a few other localized areas. Um, Toward the west, the higher elevations have been able to get some snow, but not as much as they normally do. The combination of warmer than normal temperatures and the way the weather pattern has set itself up with generally warmer and drier weather over Colorado and Wyoming is just not favoring the West. And it's really creating these large snowfall deficits, which we can see on that right map with the dark brown colors. That said, there is this one area of our region that has seen an abundance of precipitation, but unfortunately not an abundance of snow. And if you think back to earlier when I showed a 30-day precip pattern, you may recall that parts of the West, particularly Montana, have seen much above normal precipitation. Unfortunately, Montana has been greatly impacted by the atmospheric river that has been persistently digging into the Pacific Northwest and making its way over to Montana. Now, if you're unsure what an atmospheric river is, if you can visualize a long, narrow stream of water vapor in the sky, that's what it is. And for the Pacific Northwest, the river or the stream of water vapor originates from the tropical Pacific Ocean, so further south, such as by Hawaii, or even further, like from the Philippines. Currently, the river is producing near record precipitation. So at the Bear Mountain Station, a total of 6.5 inches of precipitation fell in 24 hours between December 10th and 11th, which puts it at the third wettest 24-hour period in 44 years. And at the Poor Man Creek Station, they've seen 5 inches in 24 hours, which also ranks as the third wettest 24-hour period in 27 years. These two stations have also seen roughly 12 to 13 inches in 6 days, but normally even the highest elevations in Montana don't see more than 7 or 8 inches of precipitation in December. And sometimes, or usually, it's in the form of snow, or at least some of it's in snow. So this is truly a climatologically incredible event with sadly devastating impacts. As you can see, there have been mud and landslides, rivers are raging, flooding and damage is happening all over. And so we just really want to be thinking about them out there in Montana. But like we've been talking about, the picture is very different for the eastern side of the region. We've seen several rounds of low pressure systems deliver incredible snow and blustery cold. One such event was just before Thanksgiving, bringing 3 inches to many of us and upwards of 30 inches of snow in the lake effect areas. However, before the snow hit, the rain fell across many of these states, making surfaces slick and branches and trees heavy. The accumulation of freezing rain and heavy snow meant widespread outages due to downed power lines and trees, and also meant dangerous travel conditions, including a pileup on I-94 in Minnesota. I also read and heard that over 300 crashes and spinouts were reported in Minnesota alone due to this storm. So, incredible travel disruptions. Also, schools and businesses were closed. And if I could get this video to play, to add kind of to the fire, the winds were incredibly strong with peak wind gusts in the 40s, 50s, and even 60s, causing quite the scene along the shores of Lake Superior. In fact, the winds were so strong that they pushed water from Lake Erie's western basin toward the eastern basin and lowered the levels near Kingsville, Ontario by several feet, which temporarily exposed the lake bed and revealed a sunken ship. I thought that was pretty neat. Shout out to Aaron in Ohio for sending that. That's a pretty neat effect of the strong winds of the low pressure system. Then came the post-Thanksgiving snowstorm, and as you can see, snowfall was widespread, but there is this corridor in the central Midwest that really took the hit, with the system delivering widespread amounts of 6 inches or more, even up to 16 inches in localized areas. The event was record-breaking, creating some of the largest single-day November snowfalls on record, and some of these were Dubuque, Iowa with 11 inches, Madison, Wisconsin with 9.3 inches. And in addition, this event delivered some of the largest snowfall totals we've seen from a single snowstorm in November, including Waterloo, Iowa at 14.5 inches. Along with the snow came the winds, with gusts peaking into the 30s to the 50s. And unfortunately, there were several car accidents and road closures, including on I-70 near Terre Haute, Indiana, which shut down the interstate for 6 hours, as well as thousands of flight cancellations. Then, as of late November, snowfall wasn't enough. Another round of several inches fell across the I-states the last week, widespread totals of 6 inches, even localized areas of 12 inches. And this system gave some of the I-states a push toward near record season snowfall. So, Indianapolis has seen 14.7 inches of snow this season through December 13th, making it the second greatest snowfall total through December 13th. Other areas are also nearing their seasonal snowfall totals, including Fort Dodge, Iowa, which has already received somewhere around 30 inches of snow. And of course, the winds were strong with this one too, with gusts in the 20s and 30s. And unfortunately, dangerous traveling conditions were a problem again, causing a pileup on I-80, shutting down the interstate from Iowa City to the Quad Cities. Now, where do all of these snowfall events in the recent warm up leave us in terms of snow levels and how that differs from normal? As of 9 o'clock this morning, the snowpack and the snow water equivalent across the region is really starting to dwindle thanks to the warmth and the rain. And then on the bottom right, we're looking at modeled snowmelt between 11 p.m. Monday and 11 p.m. last night, which shows areas with warmer temps and lesser snowpack seeing much more snowmelt. Looking at the bottom left, this is the snow depth departure from normal as of 12 o'clock this morning. So before some of that snow began dissipating, it does show that there was snowpack in the Great Lakes and Iowa, and it was above what we normally have on the ground for mid-November or mid-December. However, of course, that's changed over the last 12 hours, and those blues have likely gotten a little less bright, meaning that snow depth has gotten much less since early this morning. And of course, we also see lots of yellows across the map, indicating where snowpack is below normal for this time of year, especially in the mountain region. Now, we should also take a look at snowpack water content for the Missouri and Platte River basins, as this information is good to know, as the snowpack particularly affects water resources for these basins come late winter and spring. So, the blue shading that you see on the four graphs is the snowpack water content for this current season, and the red curves are the averages. And what we can note from these graphs is that the water content is running below average, about 60 to 75% of normal, thanks to the warm temps leading to below normal snow. That said, it's important to keep in mind that accumulation is still very early on in the season, and it would only take a few really moisture-filled systems to bump up the snowpack water content and change these measurements. Now, looking at the broader western U.S., since last month, there's been improvement over the mountains of Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, but still much of the Missouri River Basin is running below normal, but largely 90% less of normal, again, thanks to the warmer temperatures. As you can see, the areas with 90% or more of normal coincide with where Montana has seen an abundance of precipitation over the last month. And like I said, it's just so early in the season still. These numbers can be made up with a few moisture-filled systems, so we shouldn't be losing hope yet in terms of snow water content. Now, as you can imagine, the winter weather has been great for recreation. Ice fishing and skating has started much earlier than recent years, with some Wisconsinites saying they usually don't get out on the lake until late December. Unfortunately, though, that ice is now turning to slush with the recent warmth and rain. So, again, please use caution on the ice. Something neat with the cold snaps is that we see waterfowl migration. It's been an uptick in migration, including in mallards, which is shown on that time series. The time lapse is since late October, where the mallards didn't really start moving south until the snow and the cold hit. So just thought that was a neat feature of the cold and the snow. Ski hills across the north were able to open due to snowfall and or the ability to make snow. Snowmobiling conditions have started off much better than recent years, although unfortunately the snow is melting. Hopefully, though, some of that snow sticks around to act as a base for the future snowfall events that we do get. With the incredible snowfall amounts and the freezing rain and the winds, in parts of Michigan, there was an abundance of downed trees on trails. So there's been a lot of time spent cleaning up the trails. And then lastly, something I didn't realize was such a popular winter activity was survival running. But per Doug and Brad, the blustery cold has been ideal for runners who crave a sense of adventure and survival. So thought I'd include that for you runners out there. But one more thing to note, as I've been saying, things have changed over the last day or two. Besides the much warmer temperatures, we've had incredibly powerful winds. Many gusts reports over 80 miles per hour. The graphic from NWS Rapid City shows that a top wind gust was 101 miles per hour early this morning from the South Dakota Mesonet. 94 miles per hour at New Underwood, and from the lower Red Canyon in Wyoming, 123 mile per hour wind gust was reported. I didn't have time to do an initial survey of impacts yet, but you can only imagine what's been happening on the roads with power outages and damages being done to structures. Now, finally, we're on the home stretch, so let's talk about the outlooks. If you haven't heard yet, we are in the La Nina, and if you're wondering what that means, basically La Nina conditions in the tropical Pacific mean that sea surface temperatures are cooler than normal by about a half a degree Celsius or more, which then influences the atmospheric circulation in the tropical Pacific and thus the atmosphere around us. But looking at a little bit short-term forecast, here we have precipitation forecast for today through Christmas morning, where we see higher chances for precipitation over the eastern states and higher elevations to the west, and lower chances for the Great Plains. Do keep in mind, though, that this is for liquid equivalent precipitation, and whether or not that falls as a liquid, of course, depends on the temperature. Looking a little further out to the last week of the year, things are looking like they'll be warmer, which means that any snow we have may melt by the end of the year. As for precipitation, it's possible that most of us could see near normal precip. Chances are slightly elevated for the parts of the Great Plains to see below normal precipitation, and chances are slightly elevated for parts of the west and into North Dakota and northern Minnesota to see above normal precipitation. But as I've said before, just keep in mind that winter precipitation is not the same as summer, so above and below normal can look a lot different this time of year. Now, looking at potential hazards after Christmas, there is a risk of heavy snow for our friends in the west, particularly western Montana, and it's also possible that high winds will extend across much of the region, particularly for those in the west. So please do keep an eye out on the forecast over the next week so you have a better understanding of how this may impact you. Now, looking at the month of January, we have a La Nina-esque pattern, which, if you recall from previous webinars, typically can bring cooler temps to the northern plains and wetter conditions for the Ohio River Valley. But when we add in other factors like additional climate patterns, trends, and small-scale weather patterns, the typical pattern we expect for a La Nina looks a little different. So, for the month of January, chances are fairly equal that temperatures could end up being above, near, or below normal. For most of our region, there is a slightly elevated chance that parts of the northern states could see cooler than normal temps, and for southwestern Colorado, warmer than normal. For precipitation, equal chances that precip could be above, near, or below normal for most of the plains, Colorado, and Midwest, but we could also see chances for wetter than normal conditions over the Great Lakes region, Ohio Valley, or Ohio River Valley, and the Northern Rockies, with higher chances for the Ohio River Valley and the Northern Rockies in particular. Now, looking further ahead between January and March, the pattern is similar to what we discussed for January, still holding on to that La Nina-like flavor. The main differences are that the potential for below normal temperatures extend a little further out in the north, and the warmer than normal extends a little further north over Colorado. The chances for above normal precip also extend a little further out to encompass more of the Midwest, but the probability weakens slightly over the northern Rockies. We also see a little flavor of potentially drier than normal conditions creep into southern Colorado as well. Now, the seasonal drought outlook suggests that precipitation, or excuse me, that we could see some drought improvement for the Great Lakes states and for far western Montana and Wyoming, and perhaps persistent drought for northern Minnesota and Wisconsin and parts of the Plains and Rockies. However, as I've said, winter is dry, so it may be a little difficult to see drought improvement over the next few months, although we do hope to see some of that recharge in our soils and gaining in our precipitation deficits. Finally, just to add in a little further look ahead, we have the February through April outlook, which is similar to January through March. However, it's important to note that any La Nina or ENSO effects that we feel in our region typically weaken after March, meaning that other factors may come into play come spring. So just something to keep in mind. Finally, I'll leave you with a summary of some take-home points. Currently, dryness remains for many, despite the abundance of snowfall for the eastern part of the region, which has been great for winter recreation, but is really made for some messy travel. Fortunately, there are no major issues on our major rivers, but out of a caution and preparedness, they are monitoring low flows around St. Louis and Herman. Ice cover on the Great Lakes and local lakes are near normal for the most part for this time of year, although melting, and overall winter is off to an extreme start for those in the east, but mild in the west. Looking at the outlook, the eastern Midwest and the Rockies have the best chances for precipitation over the next week. However, those of you in the Rockies need to be aware of the potential for heavy snowfall after Christmas Day, and most of the region needs to look out for the chance of high winds after Christmas Day. Lastly, most of the region has equal chances of seeing above, near, or below normal temperatures and precipitation over the next 3 months, with the potential for cooler than normal temps across the northern plains and wetter than normal over the Great Lakes, Ohio River Valley, and northern Rockies. To wrap things up, these are just a few more links and information on our partners. I also tried to link every source that I used today so that you can check out these resources yourself. And then here are a few contact points if you have any questions or comments in the future. That's all for me. Sorry I went a little bit longer than 35 minutes, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. And I'll hand it back over to Brian now. I gotta find where the chat is. So give me a second. Thanks so much, everyone.
That was excellent overview, Bridget, and I think you really captured what's been going on. And again, quite a bit of changes just here recently over the last several days. Speaking of the wind, I actually saw there were you talked about the road closures due to snow in Iowa last weekend. Well, parts of Kansas had I-70 closed today because of dust with the winds. So it's just, we've kind of seen about everything in the region go on in the last month. So you did a really good job of the overview. Catch your breath here a little bit. And we did have a couple questions that were in the Q&A that were answered. Um, we do have some time for questions. So if you do have something you'd like to ask, you can either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we'll gladly let Bridget take a shot at it, or any of the others who are on the call to help out.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Tim.
So, with the weather stations on the internet and stuff, you can get an 8 hour view or a 6 hour view of radar for the future. But then I was wondering, is there one that goes further out, say 24 hours or 36 hours with a prediction using that radar?
Hey, Tim, sorry about that. I didn't quite catch your question. Would you mind kind of repeating or paraphrasing the
Okay.
question? Thanks, Tim.
No,
Sorry.
no, no, no problem at all. I was having problems trying to figure out how to say it. That's why I was even
That's
wondering if I was going
okay.
to say it at all. But my question was when like I go onto some of the weather stations on the internet, I can see a radar and it'll show the participation or precipitation coming in into northeast Nebraska for like the 6 hours in advance. I was wondering, is there another radar out there someplace that goes further in advance, maybe 20, 24 hours, so I could see
Oh,
where it
okay.
comes in at and be prepared for it?
Okay, okay. So are you looking more for like a future cast then? Like
Yes.
future radar? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, just like
That's
a prediction, I realized the 6 hour one is a prediction anyway, but I was wondering if it went any further than the 6 hours.
Yeah, for radar. You know, I'm gonna have to ask Brian if he has any recommendations in particular because unfortunately I don't really. But Brian, if you have a recommendation, please feel free to let Tim know.
Yeah, so Tim, it is a good question. Most of the time when those weather apps, or even sometimes you'll see it with a TV meteorologist in their broadcast, they'll show the predicted radar, and typically those are based off of um, some really short-term weather models that are really looking at what's happening in the next several hours. And so that's why you see the time window that you do. They're updated quite quickly and more often than some of our other models. So typically, when you get into hey, what's going to happen the next 24 or 48 hours? Those are different kinds of models, and instead of showing it as radar, they tend to show it as the possibility of precipitation, and that's what we're more frequently seeing with anything that goes out further. There could be someone with the Weather Service on here that has a better answer than that than what I just provided, but that would be my best guess. It's just the types of forecast models that are being utilized to show where precipitation may be occurring in the future.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate it.
And I see someone put in the chat, it says the National Weather Service has a predicted forecast precipitation on their page, and there is a link. So if you look in the chat, there is a link to what the Weather Service provides.
Awesome. Thank you.
And that was for Nebraska, it was added. So that should cover Northeast Nebraska. I will say that on this call, you tend to have a lot of various expertise. So if there is a question you'd like to ask, if we can't answer it here, we will definitely find out an answer for you and get back to you. Does anyone else have a question that they would have for Bridgette on what she presented or more clarification?
And I didn't quite say this, but if you think of questions, even in a few minutes after we get off the call, you are more than welcome to email me. I'm always happy to talk and try and reason out some questions with you. So if you don't have them right now, that's okay.
Well, as we fill in some time here, again, Bridgette did mention that the next call for this series will take place on January 15th, 2026. And I can't remember who you said, Bridgette, was the speaker for the next one.
Zach out of Montana, the
Oh,
assistant
yeah,
state climatologist.
definitely. So we'll hear from Montana next week, excuse me, next month.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe he'll be able to speak a little bit more to what's going on with the incredible precipitation in Montana. So that would be great to have him on.
All right, last chance. All right. Well, with that, like Bridgette said, contact information is on this page here for several people directly to Bridgette, and then for Dennis, Doug, and myself, uh, and Brad Rippey as well, who was on the call today. If you have any direct questions uh, regarding anything that was said today or need some follow-up, can gladly answer that. I see a lot of great comments and congratulations on your presentation, Bridgette. So you knocked it out of the ballpark, so to speak, and did a
Aw.
great job and really presented a lot of good information in a short period of time, covering a lot of different bases. And I think you did a good job of highlighting just how impactful this winter has been so far. And it can vary quite greatly from which part of the region you're in and what kind of impacts you've seen from west to east, especially, but also north to south. We've seen quite a bit. So you did a great job of covering uh, uh, differences that we've been seeing. So really, really good to do that. Okay, with that, we will end this
Yes, it's
call.
just incredible.
But go ahead, Bridgette.
No, no, no. I was just saying thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity and just being able to share what's going on. So thank you so much. Yeah, I hope everyone has a use.
And I think one thing that Bridgette did say during the call that I've always heard this from the people who've been in the field longer than me, that you kind of pay attention in our area for where the weather patterns set up by mid to late December, and we tend to see those patterns followed for much of the winter. So we're kind of in that spot right now where we've had more of that ridging over the western part of the region and making it more active towards the central and eastern parts of the region. And that's really been the pattern since about Thanksgiving that we've seen set up. Now, does that mean the rest of the winter is going to follow that pattern? More than likely not. We know better than to think that, but it really does give a good idea of kind of where the atmosphere is setting up, and if we're going to continue to see that, there's a likelihood that the main storm track will follow where it's kind of established itself. So we'll see what we have to talk about in January and see if that comes to fruition or if we see some changes and more of a La Nina impact by then.
You said it well, Brian. Thanks so much, everybody.
All right, everyone, happy holidays and enjoy some time with friends and family as we take a break here at the end of the year. Thank you.